All right, so today we're going to deep dive into a story that kind of throws a wrench, into the gears of space travel, right? It's about these astronauts, Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, who just got back to Earth. But it wasn't exactly on schedule. They had a pretty unexpectedly long mission up on the ISS.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
this was supposed to be like a routine mission, but then it turns into this huge, test of just human resilience and a pretty stark reminder that space travel is, well, risky. It's always risky.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we're going to look at an article today that details what happened, like all the events of their extra long stay up there and what it might mean for future missions.
So their initial mission was supposed to be pretty straightforward. They launched back in June of 2024, right? Aboard Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. It was just going to be a quick, test mission up to the ISS.
Exactly, like a
Yeah.
quick in and out kind of thing. But that's where things went, well, let's just say they went sideways. The Starliner had this serious problem, a malfunction with the propulsion system.
Oh, wow.
Specifically, a failure in its service module propulsion system made the whole thing unsafe to bring them back home. So now it brings up this whole other question about, well, how reliable IS, this new technology? I mean, can we really depend on it to get people safely to and from space?
So, I mean, are they just stuck up there then? It's not like they can call an Uber, right? Back to Earth from space.
Well, not quite. But the Starliner, they had to send it back to Earth without them. Empty. Imagine that logistical puzzle. All of a sudden, you've got two extra astronauts on a station that's designed for a very specific number of people. Not to mention, I mean, think about it, the psychological impact on everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
This wasn't just like, oh, a minor inconvenience. This messed up, like totally disrupted the carefully planned flow of missions going to and from the ISS. Like a constant rotation up there.
So, crew missions, they're those teams of astronauts, right? Sent up to the ISS for a specific amount of time.
Precisely. Like a well-oiled machine, everything's planned out. Now, to make room for Williams and Wilmore, they were put on the Crew-9 mission. That launched in September 2024. But think about it. To make space for them, Crew-9 had to operate with fewer crew members than planned. That's got to impact the research and tasks they could do, right? It's a domino effect.
Right, makes sense. So, instead of a short trip, they ended up spending over 9 months on the ISS.
Yep. Splashing down finally on March 18th, 2025.
Wow.
But while that's a long time, let's keep things in perspective, The current U.S. record is held by Frank Rubio, who spent 371 days in space. And the world record, that goes to Valery Polyakov. He spent an incredible 437 days on the Mir space station back in the day.
Wow, so that really puts this into perspective.
It does.
But still, 9 months, I mean, that's a significant amount of time to be in microgravity, right? And those physical effects, they aren't just going to disappear overnight.
No, not at all. It takes a toll.
Yeah.
And it's not just the physical challenges either. It's mental, too. Being isolated like that, confined, knowing you're in a dangerous environment all the time, it can have a huge impact on you psychologically.
We don't know exactly what they went through, of course,
Mhm.
but it makes you wonder what kind of support is there for astronauts, when they're stuck in these long, unexpected situations?
That's a big question. It
Hmm.
speaks to this need for real, comprehensive psychological support and training for astronauts,
Yeah.
to build up their resilience,
Hmm.
especially as we look ahead to longer missions like to Mars. Think about that, Mars and beyond.
Yeah, wow. But beyond the human impact, this situation, it kind of spilled over into politics too, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Things got a little messy.
Mhm.
President Trump and Elon Musk, close advisor to the president, head of SpaceX, they were pretty vocal. They publicly criticized the Biden administration for the whole thing.
Hmm.
Their argument was that a rescue mission was like flat out refused,
Yeah.
which, of course, the Biden administration denies. So it becomes this whole controversy highlighting how complicated things are.
Yeah.
You've got politics, private space ventures, national agendas, all tangled up in space exploration.
It really does show that even in a field that's, supposedly dedicated to science and exploration, there's still room for politics and finger pointing.
Exactly. What's interesting is how this whole thing showed weaknesses, not just in spacecraft technology, but also in our national and international spaceflight infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you question, do we have enough backups? Can we respond quickly enough in emergencies? And then there's this whole balance of power between government agencies and private companies like SpaceX.
So in the end, it was a relief mission that got them home, right? Crew-10. They arrived on March 16th, and that's what allowed Williams, Wilmore, and the rest of the Crew-9 astronauts to finally come back.
Yes, they're back safe and sound, which is great. But this incident, it raises questions that don't just go away. What does this mean for the future of commercial spaceflight? How do we minimize the risks when we're pushing the limits like this? There's some big questions to answer.
Yeah, there are. And I think, most importantly, what can we learn from all of this? How do we make sure that future astronauts are safe and well taken care of? That's something we really need to think about more as we keep going with this deep dive. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, even with all our advancements, space travel is still, well, it's still pretty risky business.
It is. The stakes are, I mean, incredibly high, and there's not a lot of room for error.
Yeah.
Not when you're talking about space.
And this whole Starliner incident, it's kind of thrown a wrench into Boeing's plans, right?
Well-
They were hoping to compete with SpaceX and this whole commercial spaceflight thing. But now, well, it just shows how important all that testing is and how you really need backups, multiple backups.
In the design.
Yeah.
You can't just, send something up there and hope for the best, especially when you're talking about human lives. And what's interesting to me is how this whole unexpected thing has really put the spotlight on the human side of space exploration. We get caught up in the technology, but it's the astronauts who are really on the front lines.
It's true. It's easy to forget that there are actual people up there dealing with all this.
Yeah, and they're not just, anyone. These are highly trained individuals. They go through so much preparation, physical, mental, you name it.
But even then, I mean, can you really prepare for something like this? Being stuck up there longer than expected in this, confined space, microgravity, hundreds of miles away from home.
It really makes you wonder what was going through their minds, Williams and Wilmore, knowing they were supposed to be up there for a short time, and then all of a sudden it's an extended stay with, like no end in sight.
Yeah.
For months. How does that affect you mentally? I mean, your performance, how you get along with the other astronauts, it's got to have some impact. That's a question that gets to the heart of human resilience. I mean, we know that isolation, feeling confined, knowing you're in a dangerous situation, it can mess with your mental health. And then on top of that, you've got this pressure of representing your country, doing this important scientific work. It's a lot to carry.
It really puts into perspective the sacrifices they make, right? I mean, they're not just pushing the limits of technology, they're pushing their own limits too.
And it brings up another point, something we need to think about. This whole incident shows the tension between, on one hand, this desire to push the boundaries, to explore, and on the other hand, keeping astronauts safe. Where do we draw the line? What's an acceptable risk, and when does it become, reckless?
That's a tough question. And it's even more complicated now, isn't it? With all these private companies getting involved, like SpaceX. They've got their own motivations, their own ideas about what risks are okay.
Exactly. Things are changing. Space exploration isn't just for government agencies anymore. Private companies are coming in, and that changes the whole dynamic. New pressures, maybe even new dangers.
Almost like we're in a new space race, but this time it's not just countries, it's corporations too, with their own goals. And, bottom lines.
That's right. And that brings up a whole bunch of ethical questions, political questions. How do we make sure astronaut safety isn't being ignored just to make money or for some political advantage? How do we make sure everyone works together? Countries, companies, everyone, especially when we're talking about something as big as space exploration.
Yeah, this is a lot to think about. It's clear that this whole incident, it's not just about, getting those astronauts back or fixing some technical problem. It goes way beyond that.
This situation has shown us how complicated things are,
Yeah.
all the different factors that affect space exploration, how they're all connected. We can't just focus on technology. We have to think about human resilience, international cooperation, making ethical decisions. That's the only way we can really explore space in a way that, that's sustainable and successful.
It makes you realize that exploring space, it's not just about conquering the unknown. It's about understanding ourselves too, our place in the universe, learning how to work together, how to adapt when things go wrong, and how to deal with the ethical issues that come up when we're, pushing the limits of what's possible.
And that's why it's so important to analyze these things, to really dig deep. When something like this happens, we can learn from it. We can use those lessons to plan better missions, make better decisions, and understand what it really means to be, a species that explores space.
So as we start to wrap things up here, what do you think is the most important thing we've learned from this? The thing that's going to stick with you?
For me, it's realizing that as we go further out there into space, the challenges we're going to face, they're going to be even harder, even more complex. And we need to approach space exploration not as conquerors, but as collaborators, with humility and respect for the human element. That's what matters most.
I like that. That's a great perspective. Yeah, it's like a whole new way of thinking about it, right? Not just conquering space, but really trying to understand it and our place in all of it.
It is. And this thing with Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, it's a good wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
Makes us think, okay, are we being realistic about the risks? How tough are we really? And how do we balance pushing the limits with keeping people safe? It's not easy.
So, what do we do now? What did we learn from all of this that can help us with future missions? Like, how can we make space exploration better and safer?
Well, one of the big things is, I think, we need really good backup plans
Yeah.
and the ability to respond quickly when things go wrong. That one problem with the Starliner's propulsion system, it had this ripple effect.
Yeah.
Suddenly they're stranded, no way to get back.
Right. That's why it's so important to have those backup systems, right? If one thing fails, something else can take over, especially out there in space where it's, well, pretty unforgiving.
Exactly. And it's not just about the hardware, the actual spacecraft. It's about planning the missions with backups in mind. What are the different things that could happen? What if they can't dock right? What if an astronaut gets sick or hurt during a long mission? You got to think about all of it.
Like, we need to be thinking ahead, right? Way ahead. Almost like a big game of, I don't know, space chess or something. Every move has these consequences that could affect the whole mission.
That's a good way to put it. And that kind of planning, that takes real teamwork, not just between the astronauts and mission control, but everyone, different countries, even the private companies.
It sounds like this whole thing has shown us that we need to be more united in how we approach space exploration. It's not just about, one country or one company doing their own thing. It's about all of us sharing the responsibility to make sure everyone who goes out there is safe and comes back home.
I think that's right. As we go further, the risks get bigger, the challenges get harder, and we need to work together more than ever, globally.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive for me. It's amazing to think about all the technology and the things we can do in space. But it's also important to remember the people involved. The politics, the risks, the ethical stuff, it's all part of it.
That's what we try to do here, right? Go beyond the headlines and really look at all the different sides of these events, connect the dots, figure out what it all means.
So before we finish up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation today?
I'd say this. Let's keep exploring space. Let's keep that sense of wonder and excitement, but let's also be smart about it. Let's remember that there are risks, and let's make sure that everyone who goes out there comes back safe and sound. That's what's important.
Well said. And to our listeners, keep asking those questions, keep learning, keep pushing your own boundaries right here on Earth. Until next time, keep looking up and stay curious about that big universe out there.